Over the past 20 years, many evangelical Christians have taken their first steps into bioethical reflection and concern about public policy through the abortion issue. For many, abortion is a profound expression of the moral depravity of contemporary society, of the disregard for the most vulnerable human life, and of selfish assertion, personal choice, and freedom. Many of us recognize the issue's connection with the euthanasia debate and with increasing public acceptance of ending dependent human life for social reasons. We rightly deplore the killing of innocent human life made legal and present it as a responsible and compassionate answer to increasing costs, to emotional and relational stress, unwanted children, and protracted suffering. We are properly fearful when decisions about the life and death of other persons are interpreted as matters of personal choice and private decision. Although we have offered some strong biblically and theologically rooted arguments for the protection of unborn human life, and some of us have worked hard in the public policy arena, we have not made major advances toward even limiting the practice of abortion. We are mystified by pro-choice arguments that insist abortion is not a moral issue, that the guilt and regret women experience after abortion are the result of heartless pro-life activists and religious fanatics who traffic in guilt-mongering. We wonder about pro-choice assertions that freedom to choose abortion is a key to women's well-being and autonomy, to women's ability to function in the public sphere as equal participants. We wonder if being able to destroy unborn human life is key to women's well-being, then what is going on? Most of us know women who have had abortions. With 1.6 million abortions a year in the US, representing almost 1/4 of all pregnancies. Some of these women are our friends, our sisters, our mothers or wives or daughters or co-workers, members of our church, or even ourselves. But most of the women's stories are rarely heard, rarely told. Rather, they are hidden behind silence and regret, or shame and moral betrayal. In our circles, they're often family secrets. Only recently have women begun to tell their stories, to bring to discussion some of the trauma, the hurt, the moral betrayal in the experience. Now, to be sure, not every woman or girl who's had an abortion has negative reactions, but most do. And the human pain and moral tragedy of abortion are often hidden behind carefully constructed rhetoric. Pro-choice arguments have focused on the woman, on the negative impact of unexpected pregnancy, denying that abortion is a moral issue, and insisting instead that it is a necessary and even proper expression of individual choice. The pro-choice position has denied the reality, or at least the moral and legal significance, of the fetus. Pro-life rhetoric has focused on advocacy for the smallest victim, for the one with no voice. Insisting that abortion is a moral issue, the pro-life movement has often denied the importance of decision-making for women, has not acknowledged the enormous impact of unexpected pregnancy on women's lives and life plans, and have largely overlooked the extremely difficult circumstances into which numbers of these children would be born. The rhetoric of the activists has framed the debate, and the focus has been on public policy, especially the legality or illegality of abortion. But what has become increasingly clear lately is that in the US, the issue is not going to be settled legislatively or by judicial decision in the near future. It is unlikely that Roe versus Wade is going to be overturned anytime soon, and even if it were, abortion as a major debate and significant practice would continue because it has become so fiercely symbolic and so tied in public debate to women's equality and women's well-being. So I think we're at a critical point in the societal-wide debate. With diminished confidence in our ability to enact major restrictions on abortion through the political process, Christians have an opportunity to address the issue at a deeper level, to attempt to reshape societal consensus, to do more complex analysis, and maybe offer some new insights. One way to do this is by listening to the women's stories, listening to their accounts of their decisions, asking what we can learn, what these stories tell us about institutions of family and workplace, of law and church, what they tell us about virtue and responsibility, what these stories suggest in terms of implications for Christian response. In the construction of the public debate, women's actual lives and experiences have figured very little. When women themselves talk about their own abortion decisions, the unambiguous, polarized rhetoric of the public debate fades, and a different experience emerges. Women's statements are highly conflicted and deeply ambivalent. Repeated themes and recurring language stand out in these accounts. In particular, we see over and over again the significance of relationships and their brokenness. We see the yearning for control and lives out of control. We see claims of choice and having no choice, and the experience of betrayal and betraying. I'd like to let 3 frequently recurring phrases frame the rest of my remarks. These phrases act like windows into the complexity of the issue, and by looking through them, we may find a way of analysis, points of contact for theological and biblical reflection, and some implications for Christian ethical response in our society. In an introduction to a collection of women's accounts of abortion, the editor writes, "Choosing to have an abortion is, in a most fundamental sense, a way of having control over one's life. Grasping even this bit of power over one's destiny can strengthen the woman." Abortion as an expression of control is probably the place where there is the most significant overlap between pro-choice rhetoric and women's actual accounts. But this is betrayed by the women's lives, which are often out of control before and after the abortion. And this is the first recurring phrase, abortion as an expression of control. A young woman who was interviewed after her 4th abortion, whose life was characterized by extraordinarily bad relationships, and whose mother was very active in the pro-life movement, said, "Yeah, I was out of control in some ways, but in some ways I was taking control by having the abortion. And that always gave me a sense of control when that happened, that at least I'm not pregnant anymore." A college student described the relief after her abortion of being able immediately to return to her schoolwork. She said, "My life just went on. I was so relieved. I mean, the problem was over." Another woman, after 2 abortions, said, "I don't think that I clearly fantasized what my life would have been like had I had those kids. But I knew that it would just have been giving up control. In a way, you know, I was just learning to take control of my life." We are inclined to ask, control over what? Is control by definition good? Why worry about control now when lives and sexual behavior are characteristically out of control? The reason that abortion presents itself as such a key expression of control is that few other individual choices have the power to avoid such major lifelong consequences. The emphasis on control is a complicated combination of personal and historical factors. Women's lives have always been more contingent, defined in relationship, and often lived within the decision-making power of men. There's a desperation about having control in extremely controlling environments, in environments that are out of control, and in situations where girls and women have not had a chance to shape their own lives. They respond to the crisis of unexpected or unwanted pregnancy with an attempt to ameliorate the consequences to themselves. Taking control feels like relief, a way of exerting some influence over lives and futures, an expression of decision-making that is in their power and has significant consequences. In these accounts, control is often conflated with being responsible to oneself. And understandings of responsibility are thin and self-centered. But control and responsibility are not the same thing. Control belongs to the language of domination. Taking control in this context often equals eliminating the consequences for the self, whereas responsibility involves a more complex response of considering the well-being of all involved and placing one's decisions in a larger conversation. It's about locating one's choice within significant relationships and commitments. The emphasis in recent writings on women's moral development has focused on developing a sense of self-worth in relation to others, a claiming of the power to choose, and an acceptance of the responsibility for choice. Carol Gilligan writes, "The essence of moral decision is the exercise of choice and the willingness to accept responsibility for that choice." Obviously, accepting responsibility for one's choices and action is a part of moral maturity. But in some of these interviews, it's as if accepting responsibility for the choices one makes is sufficient to transform morally bad choices into morally good ones. Acceptance of responsibility, while essential, is not sufficient. What is also so disturbing about some of these choices is their very individual, private character. This is, of course, by design. But such weighty decisions are not brought to a larger community, to a standard outside the self for reflection. They are rarely made in the context of full discussion and thoughtful reflection, nor are the decision makers often fully informed. When decisions are made privately, the expectations are that solutions will also be privately found. Thus, the larger community escapes from responsibility in making difficult decisions and in finding more complex solutions. In fact, abortion on demand provides a significant escape from responsibility, not just for the woman, but also for the male participant, for the larger family, the church, and the economic and political sphere. In a diabolical way, abortion suggests itself to many as the easiest way out of unexpected pregnancies for all involved. In the face of intransigent structures and attitudes of all sorts, abortion can often seem like the easiest choice. Few other rearrangements are so completely within a woman's control. But it is a quick, cheap fix that allows the community to ignore the much more complex problems, like dealing with issues behind teen pregnancy, like making the economic system more family-friendly, or making public policy more amenable to the needs of women and children. Pro-choice activists argue that legalized abortion is fundamental to women's choice and autonomy. Yet numbers of women who have had abortions describe themselves as having had no choice in their decision. And so this is the second recurring phrase, that of having had no choice. Morally, choice is connected to responsibility. Claims of having had no choice suggest two different issues. First, faced with an appalling decision, women deny responsibility and therefore personal moral guilt. Second, claiming no choice is a wounded, despairing response to a situation that allowed few good options. Abortion can seem easier to a woman than the break in family relationships and job arrangements that unexpected pregnancies can cause. One single woman acknowledged that if things were different, if attitudes toward single parenthood were better, and if finances were in place, she would have had the child. She comments, "I really considered abortion wrong, and I still do. I've never said to myself that abortion is the right thing to do. I think now my attitude is that abortion saved my life, as my life is. It left me so I could still communicate with my family. I could still have a job. It didn't totally destroy everything I was. And it was sort of a choice between me and that baby. But I couldn't, and I didn't feel that it was right." Another woman commented, "Upset, depressed, tired, desperate, I took the path of least resistance. I adopted the attitudes of those around me. I accepted their decisions as my own. I simply floated along with what had to be done. In an extremely illuminating personal account, a woman reflects on her abortion. I don't remember feeling bad. Well, no, I do. I remember not letting myself feel bad. That'd be like giving in, you know? If I let myself feel bad, it might make those people who are so against it think they're right. Like I'd be proof, a chance for them to say, you feel awful, therefore you shouldn't have done it. You're wrong. So you don't think about it, because if you think about it, you might feel bad or guilty and have to give up your choice. So no, I don't remember feeling bad. It was too scary for me to feel, because then maybe they would seem right, and they're not right. See, when you do something like that, she continues, you do it because for you it's your only choice. The sad thing is, you really want to be able to feel bad about it without feeling wrong. The issue of choice is very complicated. It is at times a denial of responsibility, but it's also a strategy for coping with grief. Many women have difficulty acknowledging or processing the feelings of loss, believing that since they chose to abort, they no longer have a right to grieve. But by denying having had a choice, one is allowed then to grieve. Mary Zimmerman, in a study of women who had had abortions, noted that 2/3 of the women studied portrayed themselves as having had no choice, being forced to have the abortion. Across her studies, only a few of the women were actually coerced, although a number of others were in terribly difficult circumstances. Generally, however, the rejection of personal responsibility, viewing oneself as being coerced, forced by the situation or by others to have an abortion, allowed the woman to see herself as a victim rather than as a perpetrator of violence. Guilt is related to responsibility, a recognition of oneself as the doer of the deed. Denying choice is partly a way of disclaiming moral responsibility for a decision about which they are ambivalent. For other women, it is a despairing, defeated response to circumstances that looked impossible, to familial situations that were overwhelmingly bad, or to extremely difficult financial circumstances. Fascinating and disturbing to me is the recurring language of betrayal. Betrayal by partners, parents, society, betrayal of the self and of the unborn child. Moral betrayal has to do with a breach of trust, with broken expectations by those who matter in our lives, and especially those who act as moral sources to us. And so this is the third theme, that of moral betrayal. A woman describes a close relationship with a male partner. When she found out that she was pregnant, they decided to marry, and they were excited about the pregnancy and life together. She had established a strong bond with the unborn child. Her partner changed his mind about marriage, and the woman felt betrayed by his decision and had an abortion the next day. She describes herself as having talked to the baby all the way through the abortion and being at peace with it and sobbing uncontrollably. She desperately wanted her partner to grieve, and he did, but she said he recovered too quickly. She was depressed and, quote, felt like nothing mattered now that I had lost the most important thing to me. She found support in her sister, but then she says all the support and love in the world couldn't touch the grief. It was such a sense of loss, such a sense of loss. Her child continually comes to mind, and she keeps talking to her. Feeling betrayed by her partner, the woman betrayed her own best instincts about nurture and life. Some women describe themselves as having been betrayed by a society that claims abortion is morally neutral and then find themselves unable to cope with its moral impact. Wanting to grieve, they felt wrong about grieving. One said, after all, we tell ourselves, abortion is legal, it's accepted, it's the right thing to do. Now that I've gone ahead and done the right thing, I have these terrible feelings of remorse. That can't be right. Another expresses her feelings following her abortion. I grieved for my lost baby, but I had to push it down and out of my mind because I was the cause of my baby's death. Betrayal hurts intensely and is often followed by silence, rage, flight from personal responsibility, and further loss in relationships. Moral betrayal leaves one with a sense of profound moral desolation. Many women deal with the moral conflict in abortion by blocking it out, but others are vulnerable to anything that brings the abortion back to mind. For many, abortion involves breaks in significant conversations with families, especially partners, and with themselves. The whole notion of privacy is closely linked to breaks in conversation and to the secrecy around many abortions. Secrecy draws boundaries tightly and in unknown ways, and it distorts information. Distorted conversations can lead to wrong decisions. For example, some women were angry with their mates for failing to oppose their decisions to abort. Almost always, relationships between single people broke up either before or after the abortion. Most interviews indicate that abortions performed with the hope of saving a relationship don't succeed. Abortion usually underscores the weaknesses in a relationship. Women are betrayed by partners, family, or the larger community when the weight of the decision is put on the woman, but all those around her also benefit from her choice to abort. In this way, everyone else avoids moral responsibility, but benefits from the convenience. The fact that abortion on demand is legal sends a confusing message to women who know that the life inside of them is growing. Matters of life and death become matters of personal choice and private decision. Our expectation is that the political and legal domains proscribe actions which threaten the lives of other persons. This is how a woman could be in the middle of an abortion procedure and begin to worry that the doctor was hurting the fetus. Abstractions collapse in the face of a very real procedure. A woman wrote, "At the back of my mind, I kept thinking it can't be true that this is a baby, elsewise how could abortion be legal? Terms like fetal tissue and product of conception eased my conscience and enforced my decision." The abstractions are undone in the actual event for many women, and this accounts for the incoherence, trauma, and unexpected difficulty that follow from some of the abortions. Women have been betrayed by a portrayal of abortion as easy, as without moral and emotional consequences. An enormous dilemma faces these women who understood themselves as basically moral persons. How can one make sense of one's voluntary role in a form of violence that is legal, but often only becomes apparent after it's too late to interrupt the procedure? Faced with the emotional and moral consequence of committing an immoral but not illegal act, women deny responsibility for the decision, claiming that they had to have an abortion or that they had no choice. Legal and structural arrangements are intensifying this dilemma. There is now tremendous pressure on young and poor women to have abortions, from social services, from social workers, from parents and boyfriends, and so on. Young women are accused of selfishness and irresponsibility if they consider carrying the pregnancy to term. In conclusion, I'd like to suggest 5 implications for Christian ethical reflection and practice. First, in the abortion debate, we should avoid language that silences the deep ambivalence and regret that characterize actual abortion decisions. The abortion accounts remind us that countless people in our society are living with moral tragedy. They need help in confronting their choices, in acknowledging their responsibility, in coming to repentance, and in finding forgiveness and healing. There is an enormous need and opportunity for pastoral care. Women who have had abortions may be some of the best advocates for life, but their voices need to be heard as they find a way to acknowledge their actions and their guilt and their grief. Second, we need to recognize the compelling power of appeals to control, choice, and autonomy. In their raw form, these values stand against the deepest Christian concerns about dependence on God and interdependence in community. The emphasis on control, particularly when it's related to life and death issues, denies that life is a gift and trust from God. But in these accounts, we also see how potent these values are, especially to those who have had little control and influence, even over their own lives. The complicated oppression of women has made abortion appear to be a tool of freedom. We need to challenge appeals to autonomous individual control as borrowing from the language and history of domination. Christians can challenge the pro-woman, pro-abortion configuration by offering genuine support to women, by helping women experience equality and respect, and by valuing women's life plans. Third, we need to help women talk about dealing with unexpected pregnancies. The emphasis on privacy, even secrecy, has allowed and sometimes pressed women to make the decisions alone. But difficult decisions should not be made alone, outside of a moral community. We can have some confidence that careful reflection and honest accounts from other women who have had abortions will help women with problem pregnancies make choices that favor life. Support groups in the past helped women feel that abortion was an expression of control and gave them the rhetoric to describe it that way. Support groups today could also help women to choose against abortion. Abortion is a major decision, a decision that is often regretted but cannot be undone. Therefore, efforts to require parental consent for minors, informed consent for all women, efforts to make sure women know about other options and have faced the implications and consequences of abortion are significant public policy restrictions that would help to limit the impact of legalized abortion. Fourth, we need to recognize that abortion does seem like the easier choice to many people. The accounts suggest that being pro-life will involve much more than being anti-abortion. It requires thoughtful attention to the context of abortion decisions, to the structural arrangements, and to relationships that leave abortion looking like the easiest and most responsible choice. Many women report that they would have been very willing to keep the child under better circumstances, which I think suggests that positive efforts to improve the circumstances of women faced with unexpected pregnancies could have a significant impact on the abortion rate. In fact, we have a public policy on abortion that is not connected to laws or decisions about abortion, but is connected to the reasons that killing unborn children can seem like a reasonable, responsible choice in our society. Policies in the absence of them on health care, family, maternity and paternity leaves, mother-child nutrition are deeply connected to whether or not abortion will be rare. As a society, we have almost unlimited liberty regarding abortion and remarkably limited support for children, families, and women who carry pregnancies to term. Until our laws and institutions are supportive of the well-being of women, children, and families, it is unlikely that abortion will become rare. But today we need to be increasingly careful that the policies we advocate will encourage personal responsibility without simultaneously encouraging abortion. Laws that allow abortion on demand are highly problematic. Law has a pedagogical function, and the legal alternative of abortion when faced with problem pregnancies makes birth seem irresponsible. In addition, allowing private decision and personal choice to control the life prospects of another has left our society very morally confused. For most women, the decision to abort was highly ambivalent. David Reardon suggests that any slight change in circumstances or encouragement from significant persons in their lives, especially husbands and boyfriends, could have brought about a reversal of their choice. This suggests to me that Christians can take the lead in recognizing the importance of male responsibility and support. And fifth, we need to help shape and model Christian understandings of responsibility. Abortion accounts suggest that the actual decisions are framed less by normative principles than by the condition of relationships, situational variables, and expected consequences. Responsibility is much more than making a choice and accepting the consequences. Responsibility requires a constant conversation between oneself and one's moral community and God. Adherence to God's laws and reflection of God's character are responses to being in covenant relation with God. Thus, the commandment against killing and the requirement to choose life are fundamental dimensions of responsibility. But this responsibility must both be taught and modeled for it to effectively challenge the truncated notions of responsibility as control and choice. Christians and churches could be much more intentional about shaping a moral consensus that values the life of the fetus, that recognizes the danger of killing innocent life, that understands the importance of marriage and child rearing and nurture, and that values women's lives and life's plans. Perhaps, now that the legality of abortion is less threatened, people will be able to risk acknowledging how terrible it is and face the moral, emotional, physical, and spiritual damage that it does. The Christian community must model a hospitable welcome to the most vulnerable human beings, even if we cannot require that welcome throughout society. As we show that suffering and sacrifice have meaning, as we welcome unexpected strangers into our lives, as we provide communities of love and support that sustain women and families through difficult pregnancies and through difficult child rearing, we offer a vision of a community in which the most vulnerable have a safe place. And because of that, all of us have a deeper understanding of God's sacrificial welcome to us.
My question to you is sort of unrelated, but how we as the Christian community may have a role in making women feel like they don't have choices. It seems to me, at least in the community where I was raised, becoming pregnant out of wedlock was the unforgivable sin and the most humiliating thing that could have happened in my family. Mm-hmm. And if we have a truncated view of forgiveness and an improper view of what the unforgivable sin is, it seems to me that women may, coming out of an evangelical Christian background, may feel that they have no choice.
Mm-hmm. In a variety of directions, actually. Yeah. No choice about unplanned pregnancies. And I think that's true. I suspect that if most of us went back to our churches and appeared sympathetic, we would actually hear a lot of the accounts that are hidden. I mean, that's at least been my experience of my students at the seminary, in my own church backgrounds, of knowing an extraordinary number of Christian women who've had abortions at some point. And I think some of probably the most troublesome ones are women who were Christians and in Christian families when they did it. I mean, that's an extraordinary issue of pastoral care. But I think there are other ways also of not, in Christian circles, of sort of not taking women's lives as seriously or not expecting as much from them and so on, that teaches women not to expect to have to make responsible decisions, right, from young adulthood. And so that we reap some of that when we don't teach women to be adults, to be responsible, to be equal.
I heard the woman speak in South Bend who wrote the article about Dan Quayle was right. And one of her things that she was trying to challenge the clergy in that group with was saying our society and the church along with that had kind of relaxed the standards and made single mother parenting and things like that more commonplace, more acceptable, which seems to make that an easier thing to do, and that's really not helpful for the children, not helpful for society. And I've struggled with that since then with this. How do you accept those people, but not, it's kind of accepting the sinner and not the sin. How do you do that in this situation? Do you have any insights for me?
I think you model the good alternatives in your congregation. I mean, I think most women who end up single parents know that it's not the best way. It's a hard life. At least that's been my experience with friends who've ended up single parents one way or another. And so I think after the person is pregnant, the debate is, in a sense, over. She's going to be a single parent if that's her situation. And I think the church needs to be a community to her. And I think I would think that in your regular preaching and teaching that you would teach about the significance of the family and the value of the family without suggesting that people can't possibly live with the consequences of difficult decisions. It seems to me that some of the increased worry about single parenthood is going to have the unintended consequence of increased abortion. That will force it in that direction. There are just some real tensions, I think, in all of those debates, even in issues about being very strict about child support. There's a lot of public policy discussion now that I think could end up increasing abortion rather than discouraging it.
There was a study published by Elliott Institute of 50 men whose wives or girlfriends had had abortions, and these were prisoners, many of them very hard-hearted people, and showing the depth of emotional involvement that they had in that event.
Yeah, I think the stories of men haven't been told very well, but I suspect there's quite a lot of ambivalence there also. There's obviously some significant benefiting from abortion in terms of not having to bear the responsibility, but also I think a number of the men have enormous regret and guilt also. Yeah. And I think control is a funny issue, because control, sections of control are very connected to responsibility and to shaping one's life plans and so on, which are the good pieces. But control is just sort of imposing one's will without thinking about the nature of the act is a problem.